Gunfire shattered the quiet of a Tuesday night, leaving a feared syndicate boss bleeding out on a diner floor, bystanders paralyzed, cowards fleeing, no one moved to save Vincent Costa. Then, a weirdy waitress dropped to her knees right between his legs, executing a move that changed the underworld forever. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling, one of Boston's most exclusive late-night dining establishments. Inside, the atmosphere was a curated blend of low jazz, clinking crystal, and the hushed murmurs of the city's elite. Madeline Hayes, known to her co-workers simply as Maddie, balanced a silver tray of empty champagne flutes on her hip. Her feet ached. It was 10 minutes to midnight, marking the end of a grueling 14-hour double shift. She wanted nothing more than to take off her orthopedic black shoes and catch the last train back to her cramped apartment in Dorchester. At the corner booth, cloaked in the shadows away from the streetlights, sat Vincent Costa. Vincent wasn't just a wealthy patron, he was the undisputed architect of Boston's modern underworld. At 38, he possessed a cold, calculating demeanor that had allowed him to violently consolidate the fractured Italian syndicates under one banner. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, sipping an espresso while quietly reviewing a ledger his accountant had passed him earlier. He was flanked by two heavily armed men, Thomas and Gregory, who stood like stone gargoyles near the velvet ropes of his private section. Maddie had served him twice tonight. He had tipped her a crisp $100 bill both times, never looking at her face, his dark eyes perpetually scanning the exits. It was just another night in a city run by men with deep pockets and dark secrets. Until the front glass exploded. It didn't sound like a movie. There was no dramatic echo, just a deafening, concussive crack, crack, crack that seemed to suck the air out of the room. The reinforced glass of the entryway shattered inward like a tidal wave of diamonds. Chaos erupted in a split second. The jazz pianist stopped dead. Screams tore through the elegant dining room as patrons scrambled, diving beneath linen-draped tables or stampeding blindly toward the kitchen swinging doors. Maddie dropped her tray, the crystal shattering into 100 pieces around her ankles, and threw herself behind the heavy mahogany of the service bar. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs, her breath catching in her throat. Peeking over the edge of the bar, Maddie witnessed the terrifying precision of a professional hit. Two men in dark raincoats and motorcycle helmets had breached the entrance with silenced submachine guns. Thomas, Vincent's loyal left-hand man, drew his weapon but was instantly cut down, collapsing over a serving cart in a spray of crimson. Vincent Costa, however, was not a man who froze. He overturned the heavy oak dining table with a single violent heave, using the thick wood to absorb the incoming volley. He drew his own compact firearm, returning fire with lethal accuracy. One of the masked assailants took a bullet to the collarbone and dropped instantly, his weapon clattering across the polished marble floor. The second hitman panicked, spraying a wild burst of gunfire across the room before turning on his heel and sprinting back out into the pouring rain. A suffocating silence descended on the Sterling, broken only by the whimpers of terrified patrons and the rhythmic patter of rain blowing through the shattered storefront. Maddie slowly rose from her hiding spot, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted across the devastation until they locked onto the corner booth. Vincent Costa was no longer standing. He was leaning heavily against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. His composure was gone, replaced by a grimace of absolute agony. As the shock wore off, the patrons who hadn't fled began to emerge from under the tables. The restaurant manager, Richard Boyle, a man who usually strutted around in a tailored suit barking orders at the staff, was pale and shaking. He took one look at the downed Mafia boss and immediately backed away, locking himself inside the manager's office. The remaining waitstaff huddled near the kitchen, whispering in panicked, hushed tones. Nobody moved to help him. The infamous Vincent Costa was dying in front of them, and the sheer terror of his reputation, coupled with the violence they had just witnessed, kept everyone rooted to the spot. Maddie's eyes fixed on Vincent's lower half. The charcoal fabric of his trousers was turning black, soaked with a rapid, pulsing flow of dark liquid that was pooling rapidly on the white marble floor. Her breath hitched. She hadn't spent 3 years in nursing school before her father's gambling debts forced her to drop out without learning how to recognize an arterial bleed. The bullet had struck high on his right thigh, the femoral artery. He has 3 minutes, her brain calculated with cold, terrifying clinical precision. 3 minutes before he bleeds out and goes into irreversible shock. Vincent's remaining bodyguard, Gregory, finally emerged from the hallway near the restrooms. He hadn't fired a single shot. Gregory rushed over to his boss, kneeling beside him, but his actions were strange. He wasn't applying pressure. He was merely holding Vincent's shoulders, looking around frantically, and shouting, "Someone call an ambulance. Stay with me, boss. Stay with me." But Gregory's hands were clean. He was making a show of helping while deliberately letting the kingpin bleed. Vincent's head lolled to the side. His skin, usually olive-toned, was rapidly draining of color, turning a sickly, translucent gray. His dark eyes flickered, fighting to stay conscious, and for a fraction of a second, they met Maddie's from across the room. There was no fear in the Mafia boss's eyes, only the grim, silent realization of betrayal. He looked at Gregory's clean hands, and he knew. Maddie didn't think about the syndicates. She didn't think about the danger, or the men with guns, or the fact that getting involved in a mob hit was practically signing her own death warrant. She saw a human being whose life was draining onto the floor while a traitor watched the clock. Maddie stepped out from behind the bar. "What are you doing? Get back!" One of the line cooks hissed from the kitchen door, reaching out to grab her apron. Maddie ignored him. She crossed the dining room floor, her rubber-soled shoes slipping slightly on the slick marble. The scent of copper and gunpowder hung heavy in the air, thick and nauseating. As she approached the corner, Gregory looked up, his hand hovering near the holster at his waist. "Back off, waitress. The paramedics are coming. Don't touch him." "If we wait for the paramedics, he's gonna die," Maddie said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "I said back the hell off," Gregory snarled, stepping into her path and shoving her hard in the chest. Maddie stumbled backward, her hip crashing into a toppled chair. Pain flared, but it only sharpened her focus. Vincent let out a ragged, shallow breath. His eyes fluttered shut. The pool of red was expanding, soaking into the grout of the marble. "You're letting him die," Maddie said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. She looked Gregory dead in the eye. "I know what ephemeral bleed looks like, and I know you're not doing a damn thing to stop it." Gregory's expression shifted. The panic vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian glare. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. "Walk away, little girl. You didn't see anything. Go back to the kitchen and you live to serve drinks tomorrow." It was an explicit threat. It was the smart move to turn around. But Maddie looked past the corrupt bodyguard at the dying man on the floor. Vincent was ruthless, yes, but leaving a man to be murdered by his own protector in front of her felt like a line she couldn't uncross once she stepped over it. Before Gregory could draw his weapon, Maddie moved. She didn't retreat. Instead, she lunged forward, ducking under Gregory's arm. She grabbed the heavy metal ice bucket from the serving cart next to her and swung it upward with all her strength, catching Gregory perfectly under the jaw. There was a sickening crunch. Gregory's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, his gun sliding uselessly across the marble. Gasps erupted from the huddled patrons in the background. A waitress had just assaulted an armed mobster. Maddie didn't waste a second. She threw herself onto the floor beside Vincent. The volume of blood was catastrophic. Because of where the bullet had entered high up, mere inches from the groin crease, a standard makeshift tourniquet around the leg wouldn't work. The injury was too high. The only way to stop the bleeding was direct, massive mechanical pressure against the pelvic bone. She straddled his right leg, dropping heavily onto her knees right between the dying mob boss's legs. It was a compromising, intensely intimate position, but there was no room for modesty in trauma care. She ripped the heavy cotton apron from her waist, balling it up into a dense fist of fabric. Vincent groaned, his eyes flashing open. The sudden movement and the presence of someone over him triggered a primal defense mechanism. He weakly tried to raise his hand to push her away. "Get off." He rasped, his voice barely a breath. "Don't move," Maddie ordered, her tone authoritative and commanding, entirely stripping away the subservient waitress persona. "You have a severed femoral artery. You have seconds left." She positioned the balled-up apron directly over the bullet wound in his upper thigh, groin area. Then, placing her right knee directly on top of her hands, she leaned her entire body weight forward, driving her knee and hands down into his flesh, crushing the severed artery against the underlying bone. Vincent let out a guttural, agonizing scream. His entire body arched off the floor in pure torment. The pain of the pressure was likely worse than the gunshot itself. His hands, slick with his own blood, shot up and gripped her hips, fingers digging into her skin as he tried to throw her off him. "Hold still!" Maddie yelled, tears of exertion and terror pricking her eyes. She clamped her left arm down on his chest, using her position between his legs to maintain the brutal leverage needed. If I let up the pressure, you die. Stay down. Vincent's chest heaved. He stared up at her, his vision blurring. He saw the sweat beading on her forehead, the fierce, unyielding determination in her eyes. She wasn't an assassin. She wasn't one of his sycophants. She was the girl who had poured his coffee 20 minutes ago, and she was currently putting herself directly in the line of fire, burying her knee into his wound with a desperate, savage grace to keep his soul in his body. Slowly, his grip on her hips loosened. The fight drained out of him, not from death, but from submission to her intervention. His head fell back against the marble, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid gasps. "Keep pressing." He managed to whisper, his dark eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her shiver, despite the adrenaline. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied through gritted teeth. Her arms were already screaming from the effort. It took an immense amount of physical strength to occlude a major artery manually. She felt the heavy, terrifying pulse of his lifeblood pushing against her hands and knee, a rhythmic thumping that threatened to break past her barrier. From the corner of her eye, she saw Gregory start to stir. The traitorous bodyguard groaned, shaking his head and reaching blindly for the gun on the floor. Maddie couldn't move. If she shifted her weight to kick the gun away, the pressure would release, and Vincent's remaining blood volume would wash out onto the floor. She was trapped, kneeling over the mob boss, entirely defenseless. Gregory's hand closed over the grip of his pistol. He raised his head, blood dripping from his split chin, and leveled the barrel directly at Maddie's chest. "Stupid bitch," he slurred. Vincent saw it. Even on the brink of death, the Kingpin's instincts were sharp. He couldn't reach his own gun, and he couldn't sit up. But his hand, still resting near Maddie's hip, slid down to the ankle holster he kept strapped beneath his tailored trousers, a backup piece Gregory didn't know about. With the last reserve of his strength, Vincent pulled the small revolver, blindly angling it around Maddie's waist, and pulled the trigger twice. The deafening blast in such close proximity made Maddie cry out, squeezing her eyes shut. When she opened them, Gregory was flat on his back, 2 bullet holes center mass. Vincent dropped the smoking revolver. His hand fell back, limp. He looked up at Maddie, the faintest ghost of a smirk playing on his pale lips. "We're even," he whispered, before his eyes rolled back, and he finally slipped into unconsciousness. Maddie sat there in the deafening aftermath, trembling violently, her knee still buried deep into the unconscious boss's thigh, her hands stained crimson. The wail of police sirens finally pierced the night, growing louder as flashing blue and red lights painted the shattered restaurant front. But it wasn't the police who entered first. 3 sleek black SUVs slammed onto the curb outside, tires screeching, the doors flew open, and half a dozen men in dark suits stormed through the shattered entrance, assault rifles raised. At their head was Leo Danvers, Vincent's notoriously brutal underboss. Leo's eyes swept the carnage, the dead assassins, the dead bodyguard, and finally, the corner booth. He saw his boss, lying motionless in a pool of blood, and straddling him, pinning him down, was a waitress covered in gore. To anyone else, it looked like a desperate attempt to save a life. But to a paranoid Mafia underboss arriving at the scene of an ambush, it looked like an execution. Leo raised his weapon, leveling the sights squarely at Maddie's head. "Get your hands off him!" he roared, the click of the safety disengaging echoing loudly through the silent dining room. "Get off him, or I blow your brains out right now." The barrel of Leo Danvers' rifle did not waver. The underboss of the Costa Syndicate was a man constructed of pure, unadulterated violence, and the scene before him computed as an assassination in progress. "I said, get your hands off him," Leo bellowed, his finger tightening dangerously on the trigger. His men fanned out, securing the perimeter of the ruined dining room, their boots crunching over the shattered crystal and overturned mahogany. Maddie's arms were shaking so violently she thought her elbows might snap. The muscles in her shoulders burned with a lactic acid fire, but she did not shift her weight off Vincent's groin. The blood beneath her hands was slick and cooling, but the violent, terrifying throb of the severed femoral artery was still fighting against her makeshift barricade. "If I take my hands off him, he dies!" Maddie screamed back, her voice cracking with sheer terror and physical exhaustion. "He was shot in the artery. I'm holding the pressure. Look at the floor. Damn it!" Leo took a slow, calculated step forward, the rifle still leveled at her face. His eyes darted from Maddie's pale, sweat-drenched face to the horrific pool of crimson spreading across the white marble. He saw the dead hitmen. He saw Gregory, his own man, lying dead with 2 bullet holes in his chest, holes that matched the smoking backup revolver, lying inches from Vincent's limp hand. The math started to click in Leo's head. Before Leo could issue another command, the wail of sirens outside turned into a cacophony of screeching brakes. Real paramedics, not the corrupt police on the syndicate's payroll, but standard city EMTs swarmed through the shattered glass doors, carrying trauma bags and a collapsible stretcher. "Clear the way! Boston EMS!" a seasoned paramedic shouted, freezing when he saw the men with assault rifles. Leo didn't lower his gun, but he jerked his head toward Vincent. "Fix him," he snarled, "or you all die in this room." Two paramedics rushed forward, their eyes widening at the volume of blood. The lead medic, a burly man named Sullivan, dropped to his knees beside Maddie. He took one look at her positioning, her knee driven into the apron, her body weight pinning the mob boss to the floor, and his face paled. "You've got the femoral?" Sullivan asked, his tone shifting from panic to intense clinical focus. "Yes," Maddie choked out, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "It's high up, just below the crease. I've been holding it for, I don't know how long. 5 minutes? You saved his life," Sullivan muttered. He reached into his trauma kit, pulling out a heavy-duty combat tourniquet and a massive roll of hemostatic gauze. "Okay, sweetheart, listen to me. When I say go, I need you to lift your weight, but do not move your hands until I pack this wound. Understand?" Maddie nodded frantically. 1, 2, 3, go! Maddie lifted her knee. A fresh surge of hot, dark blood instantly pushed against her fingers, but Sullivan was faster. He jammed a fistful of chemically treated gauze directly into the bullet track, packing the wound with brutal efficiency before securing the high-pressure tourniquet. "He's crashing! Get the backboard!" Sullivan yelled to his partner. Freed from her agonizing task, Maddie collapsed backward onto the slick marble floor. She lay there, staring up at the ornate, bullet-riddled ceiling of the Sterling, gasping for air. Her hands, her apron, her forearms, they were painted a terrifying, solid crimson. The adrenaline that had kept her going suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, shuddering void. She watched in a daze as the paramedics hoisted Vincent Costa onto the stretcher. He looked like a corpse, his skin a chalky grey, his lips tinged blue. As the medics sprinted out of the restaurant with the bleeding kingpin, Maddie tried to push herself up into a sitting position. She needed to go home. She needed to wash her hands. She needed to forget tonight ever happened. But a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder, pinning her to the floor. She looked up into the cold, dead eyes of Leo Danvers. He had holstered his rifle, but his grip was like a vice. "You're not going anywhere," Leo said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. Gregory was a traitor. The hit was an inside job. And right now, you're the only witness who saw exactly how this went down. I just served drinks," Maddie stammered, panic clawing up her throat. "I helped him. I saved his life." "Which is why you're still breathing," Leo replied coldly. He signaled to two of his suited men. "Bag her. Take her to the secure wing at Street Jude's. If Costa wakes up, he's going to want to talk to her. If he doesn't..." Leo's gaze darkened. She knows too much about Gregory. The men hauled Maddie to her feet. She didn't even have the strength to scream as they dragged her out the back exit, throwing her into the back of a blacked-out SUV. As the doors slammed shut, swallowing her in darkness, Maddie realized she hadn't just saved a life. She had anchored herself to a monster. For 4 days, Maddie existed in a state of luxurious captivity. She was held in a private, heavily guarded recovery suite on the top floor of Street. Jude's Medical Center, a hospital known for taking massive donations from anonymous benefactors in exchange for looking the other way. The room was nicer than her apartment. It had a sweeping view of the Boston skyline, a marble bathroom, and catered meals. But there was a man in a dark suit stationed outside her door 24 hours a day, and her cell phone had been confiscated the moment she was thrown into the SUV. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt the terrifying, rhythmic pulse of Vincent Costa's blood fighting against her hands. She saw Gregory's lifeless eyes. She was a civilian trapped in a war zone, and the sheer unpredictability of her fate was slowly driving her insane. On the evening of the 4th day, the heavy oak door clicked open. Maddie scrambled off the velvet armchair, her heart hammering against her ribs. Leo Danvers stepped into the room. He didn't look like a man who had been sleeping. He looked haggard, his suit slightly wrinkled, a dark shadow of stubble coating his jaw. "He's awake," Leo said flatly, "and he's asking for the waitress." Maddie swallowed hard. Am I going to be allowed to go home after this? Leo didn't answer. He simply opened the door wider, motioning for her to follow. She was escorted down a pristine, eerily quiet corridor. Half a dozen heavily armed men patrolled the hallway, their eyes tracking her every movement. They stopped in front of the double doors of the VIP intensive care suite. "Keep it brief," Leo muttered, pushing the door open. Maddie stepped inside. The room smelled of sharp antiseptic and ozone. A symphony of heart monitors and IV pumps beeped rhythmically in the background. In the center of the room, propped up against a mountain of white pillows, was Vincent Costa. He looked entirely different from the terrifying, untouchable mob boss she had seen at the restaurant. He was pale, an IV line taped to the back of his hand, a thick dressing visible beneath the hospital gown near his hip. Yet, despite the physical frailty, the aura of dangerous authority remained entirely intact. His dark eyes locked onto her the second she entered the room, sharp and calculating. "Madeline," his voice was rough, like crushed gravel, parched from days of intubation. Maddie stopped a few feet from the bed, her hands nervously twisting the hem of the clean hospital scrubs they had given her to wear. You know my name." "I make it a point to know the names of the people who pour my coffee," Vincent said, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. "And I certainly make it a point to know the names of people who crush my pelvic bone to keep me from bleeding out." A tense silence stretched between them. The power dynamic in the room was suffocating. "You saved my life," Vincent stated. "Not as a compliment, but as an undeniable fact. Dr. Croft said I had maybe 40 seconds left before the brain damage became irreversible. You knew what you were doing." "I went to nursing school for 3 years," Maddie whispered, keeping her eyes glued to the tiled floor. "I recognized the arterial spray." Vincent shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. "Gregory," he just stood there. "He was waiting for you to die," Maddie said, looking up, anger temporarily overriding her fear. "He told me to walk away. He tried to shoot me when I wouldn't." Vincent's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing visibly beneath his pale skin. "I saw. That's why I put 2 bullets in him." He paused, studying her face with an unsettling intensity. "Why didn't you walk away, Madeline? A man with a gun tells you to leave. A man bleeding on the floor is nothing to you. The smart move was to run." Maddie let out a shaky breath. "Because it was the right thing to do. I couldn't just watch a man be murdered. I don't care who you are or what you've done. You're a human being." Vincent stared at her for a long, silent moment. The Mafia boss had lived his entire life in a world of transactions, betrayals, and calculated loyalties. People only helped him if they feared him or if they wanted something from him. The concept of someone risking their own life for him purely out of fundamental human decency was entirely foreign. "Your altruism is a liability," Vincent finally said, his tone softening just a fraction. "But it is also the reason I am breathing." He reached over to the bedside table, picking up a sleek, black smartphone. It was hers. He tossed it onto the bed. "Leo wanted you buried," Vincent continued bluntly, ignoring her shocked expression. "Not literally, but hidden." Gregory didn't act alone. He was paid by the Moretti family, but the leak came from inside my own house. Someone in my inner circle gave the Morettis my schedule. Someone knew I was auditing the ledgers at the Sterling. Maddie took a step back, shaking her head. "I don't want to know this. I don't care about your syndicate. Just let me go home, please." "You don't understand," Vincent said, his voice hardening, authoritative and absolute. "The people who paid Gregory know you were there. They know you're the reason the hit failed. If you walk out of this hospital and go back to your apartment in Dorchester, you will be dead before midnight. They have to tie up loose ends, Madeline." The blood drained from Maddie's face. The reality of her situation crashed down on her like a physical weight. She hadn't just saved his life. She had ruined the perfect assassination plot of a rival crime family. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, I'm a civilian. I have nothing to do with this." "You do now," Vincent replied. "It wasn't a threat, it was a grim statement of reality. You bled for me. You fought for me. In my world, that creates a debt that cannot be ignored. I protect what is mine, and right now, your life belongs to me." Maddie stared at the ruthless kingpin, realizing with a sickening drop in her stomach that the nightmare hadn't ended in the restaurant. The moment she knelt in his blood, she had sealed her own fate. She was no longer a waitress. She was a pawn in a billionaire mobster's war. 2 days later, Maddie was transported out of Street Jude's medical center in the back of an armored Mercedes Maybach S 680 Guard. The heavy, Bullet-resistant doors sealed her into a quiet, leather-scented vacuum, separating her from the world she used to know. She wasn't taken back to her cramped Dorchester apartment. Instead, the convoy snaked its way through the affluent, tree-lined streets of Brookline, eventually passing through a set of imposing wrought iron gates into Vincent Costa's private estate. The sprawling, 12,000-square-foot limestone mansion was a fortress masquerading as a luxury home. Armed men walked the perimeter with Belgian Malinois guard dogs, and high-definition security cameras tracked her every step as she was led inside. Maddie was given a guest suite that overlooked a manicured courtyard. Her closet had been filled with high-end, neutral-toned clothing, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, and tailored trousers that fit her perfectly. It was a golden cage, constructed with meticulous care, but a cage nonetheless. Vincent, recovering with a startling, almost inhuman speed, operated his empire from a vast, mahogany-paneled study on the ground floor. Because he refused to let the syndicate's private doctors stay on the property overnight, paranoia being his sharpest survival tool, Maddie was tasked with managing his medical care. She changed his dressings, monitored his vitals, and administered his intravenous antibiotics. It was during these quiet, clinical interactions that the terrifying mob boss became just a man. She saw the grimaces of pain he hid from his men. He saw the steady, unflinching competence she hid behind her quiet demeanor. A strange, unspoken trust began to root itself in the space between them. She was the only person in the house who didn't want his money or his power. She just wanted him to heal so she could leave. "You're pressing too hard," Vincent grunted one evening as Maddie cleaned the sutured wound near his hip. He was sitting in a high-backed leather chair, a crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 resting on the side table. "If I don't clean it properly, you'll get a staph infection, and the bullet won't be what kills you," Maddie retorted, not backing down. She expertly taped down the fresh gauze. "You need to stay off the leg. The cane isn't enough." Vincent looked down at her, a glimmer of dark amusement in his eyes. "You're giving orders to a man who runs half the eastern seaboard, Madeline." "I'm giving medical advice to a patient who is too stubborn to listen," she corrected, snapping off her latex gloves. Their quiet moment was abruptly shattered when the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Leo Danvers strode in, flanked by two lieutenants. He barely acknowledged Maddie, his eyes locked on Vincent. "We intercepted a shipment at the docks. The Morettas are making a push for the north side," Leo reported, his voice tight. "They know you're injured. They're trying to capitalize on the weakness. We need to retaliate tonight." As Leo spoke, he pulled a secondary phone from his jacket pocket, a heavy, customized titanium device meant for secure, encrypted communications. As he tapped the screen, the device emitted a very specific dual-tone notification chime from the Threema app. Maddie froze. The sound hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She remembered that sound. The acoustics of the marble floor at the Sterling had amplified everything in those terrifying minutes. While she had been straddling Vincent, crushing his artery with all her might, Gregory had been lying dead just a few feet away. Right before Vincent had passed out, Gregory's pocket had emitted that exact same distinct dual-tone chime. Maddie's eyes darted to Leo's wrist. As he gestured aggressively, his jacket sleeve pulled back, revealing a bespoke, rose-gold Patek Philippe Nautilus. It was the same watch she had seen flashing under the restaurant's emergency lights on the wrist of the man who had shoved her back into the kitchen before the shooting started, the man who had supposedly secured the perimeter. Leo hadn't been securing anything. He had been coordinating the hit. Maddie felt the blood drain from her face. She picked up her medical tray, keeping her head down, and quietly slipped out of the study. She waited until midnight. The mansion was quiet, the heavy rain masking the sound of the perimeter patrols. Maddie slipped out of her suite and crept down the grand staircase, her bare feet making no sound on the imported Persian rugs. She reached Vincent's study and slipped inside. Vincent was awake, sitting in the dark, staring into the dying embers of the fireplace. "I know who the leak is," Maddie whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Vincent didn't move, but the atmosphere in the room instantly sharpened. "Speak." Maddie told him everything. The specific encrypted chime from Gregory's phone that matched Leo's, the rose gold Patek Philippe, the timeline of Leo's arrival at the restaurant, which had always bothered her. "He didn't come to rescue you," she concluded, her heart hammering. "He came to make sure Gregory finished the job. And when he saw I was keeping you alive, he was going to execute me right there to cover it up." Vincent remained perfectly still, the The silence stretched for so long that Maddie thought he didn't believe her. In the Mafia hierarchy, an underboss was family. She was just a waitress. Slowly, Vincent reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a suppressed Heckler & Koch USP tactical pistol. He set it carefully on the blotter. "Leo has been with me for 15 years, Vincent said softly, but ambition is a poison that rots a man from the inside. He looked up at Maddie, his dark eyes entirely devoid of mercy. "Go back to your room, Madeline. Lock the door. Do not come out, no matter what you hear." Maddie didn't argue. She turned and fled. The confrontation happened in the dead of night. Leo, believing he had finally found the perfect moment to slip a lethal air bubble into Vincent's foreline while the house slept, bypassed the security detail and entered the master bedroom. He didn't find a helpless, sleeping patient. He found Vincent Costa sitting up in a chair in the corner of the room, fully dressed, the suppressed pistol leveled directly at Leo's chest. "You always were too eager, Leo." Vincent's voice was like ice cutting through the dark. Leo froze, the syringe dropping from his hand and clattering onto the hardwood floor. He didn't bother denying it. The evidence was lying right there. "The Morettis offered me a 50% stake," Leo sneered, the facade dropping completely. "You're a dinosaur, Vincent. The old ways are dead." "And so are you," Vincent replied. 3 silent shots coughed into the quiet room. The next morning, the mansion was swept clean. Leo Danvers was gone, his disappearance neatly covered up by the syndicate's fixers. The internal coup had been crushed before it could fully bloom, all because a civilian with sharp eyes and a desperate sense of morality had refused to look away. Vincent summoned Maddie to the sunroom overlooking the gardens. He was standing by the window, leaning heavily on his silver-handled cane. "It's done," he said without turning around. "The threat is eliminated. The Morettis are retreating." He turned to face her. On the glass table between them sat a thick manila envelope, a brand new passport, and a set of keys to a loft in Geneva, Switzerland. "Your golden ticket," Vincent said. "A new identity. Enough money in an offshore account to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You saved me twice, Madeline. I am paying my debt. You are free to walk out those doors and never look back." Maddie stared at the envelope. It was everything she had wanted 4 days ago. It was safety. It was peace. But as she looked at Vincent, the ruthless kingpin who had trusted her with his life and his empire's darkest secrets, she realized something had irrevocably changed. The terrifying, adrenaline-fueled chaos of his world had awakened something dormant inside her. She wasn't the tired, subservient waitress pouring champagne for people who didn't see her anymore. She had faced down assassins, saved a mob boss's life, and rooted out a traitor. She had found her power in the darkness. Maddie reached across the table and pushed the envelope back toward him. "I don't speak French," she said evenly, her chin tilted up, "and someone has to make sure you actually finish your course of antibiotics." A slow, genuine smile broke across Vincent Costa's face, a rare, dangerous expression that signaled the true beginning of a new era for the Boston Syndicate. He picked up his cane and stepped closer to her, the air between them crackling with an undeniable, fierce tension. "Then I suggest you get comfortable, Madeline," he murmured. "Because in this house, we play for keeps." Nobody helped the bleeding kingpin until a desperate waitress shattered the bystander effect, dropping to her knees to crush his severed artery. That single, shocking act of medical improvisation didn't just cheat death, it dismantled the syndicate's hierarchy. Madeline traded her stained apron for a permanent place beside the throne, proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in a room full of assassins is the one fighting to save him